Fire up. Looks like we are just going live now on Periscope. Let's raise this up a little bit. Get this right where it needs to be for the rest of the show. And it looks like we're also online on YouTube and Facebook. So that means we're ready to rock and roll. Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Gruler. I am the host of Watching the Watchers Live. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and this show is something that we have done. We put it together after many, many years of representing many thousands of people in the criminal justice system. And over the course of those years working, we've seen a lot of misconduct, a lot of malfeasance, a lot of problems in our criminal justice system, particularly from police officers, prosecutors, judges, politicians, basically anybody involved in the criminal legal world. We see issues with it. And so Watching the Watchers was born in order to really hold some people accountable, to talk about these issues, to increase transparency, to shine some sunlight on all of these issues so that we can start to see some meaningful change throughout our criminal justice system. Now, 2020 has been a year where this has been a topic that everybody has been interested in for a long time. People have sort of seen these issues bubbling under the surface, but 2020 is really the year where the dam kind of broke and all of these issues are coming to light. We've been covering a lot of the cases here on this channel, so if you're not already a subscriber, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. It's great to have you here and to have you be part of this conversation because it's critically important. We are seeing more and more problems. Yesterday, we learned that the Breonna Taylor case, we learned that the officers weren't charged for actually anything having to do with her death. There were some charges that were filed. There was an indictment of one officer. We did sort of a deep dive yesterday on how that case unfolded. We saw some clips from Daniel Cameron. And today what we're going to do is sort of review some of the aftermath of that decision. So yesterday we were bracing for some of the protests. There was an emergency order by the governor. There was a lockdown. There was curfews. It was sort of pandemonium. So today we've got a lot of clips about what went on yesterday, not only in Louisville, but also around the country, places like Portland, places like Seattle, where we've seen a lot of these issues bubbling over for a long period of time. So we've got a lot of clips about all of those, different areas and the different protests. We've seen a lot of really sort of egregious behavior coming from the protesters / rioters. We've seen a lot of egregious behavior coming from the cops. And so we want to document some of that. But what we really want to do is dive into some additional questions. There was a lot of information that came out yesterday. We also heard from the defense attorney for Kenneth Walker, who was Breonna Taylor's boyfriend. And he's got some interesting things that he shared with us. So we saw the attorney general from Kentucky come out and give his recitation of the facts. And now we have the defense attorney who came out and he said some other things. And so we want to break that down. And then I also clipped a bunch of the Kentucky statutes, some of the self-defense statutes, some of the, what can you do when law enforcement comes into your house statutes. So we're going to review some of those as well. So today is going to be a lot of Breonna Taylor. We've got a lot of information about it, but we'll wrap up the show with some more gossip from the Supreme Court, what's going to be happening there. We know that this weekend, President Trump has announced that he is going to be announcing who the next nominee will be on the Supreme Court, going to be happening Saturday over at the White House. And so we're going to take a look at the markets. We're going to take a look at the horse race, who's jockeying and who's going where and how that's all going to unfold. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned, today we're talking about Breonna Taylor, the Breonna Taylor aftermath. There is a lot going on in Louisville. And what I really want to do is make sure that we're answering these questions. So as we're going through the show today, let's think about some of these things. Did Kenneth Walker shoot first? These are open questions that we have not seen answered yet. And so it's sort of presumed that he did, but is there any evidence to actually show that? And so we're going to dive into that. Did Kenneth Walker's bullet actually hit John Mattingly? This is the first officer who was inside. Did the actual bullet from Kenneth Walker's gun go and hit John Mattingly? We don't really know. Did the police truly announce? So we know that there's some evidence that they did some knocking on the door, but did they really announce? It's very critical to the analysis that we're going to go through. And did any of Brett Hankinson's bullets actually hit Breonna Taylor? We know from the press conference yesterday that there was a bullet that actually killed Breonna Taylor, and we know that that came from Officer Cosgrove. But did any of Brett Hankinson's bullets hit Breonna Taylor? That we just don't know about. And if they did as a related question, if they did hit Breonna, would he have been charged? So as we're going through a lot of the material today, think about those questions. And I want to hear from you. If you're joining us live, drop some of that on the comments, because we're going to be really sort of dissecting each one of those questions. But before we do, let's take a look at what happened. So as we were on the program yesterday, we were literally broadcasting at 4:30 Arizona time, which is right about the same time the sun went down in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we were expecting that the protests would be unfolding literally as we were broadcasting yesterday. We got off the show and we started watching it unfold. And here is what we see. We see a lot of protests going on. Just, the police are sort of lining up. Here's a clip of what was happening in Louisville yesterday. Turn that volume up. So the police are lined up, forming their lines as they do. They've got their batons, their whacking sticks. People are getting just sort of, rounded up. They've got all their zip ties, just rounding people up. We're clipping through the video there. You can see kind of a overwhelming force. There was some evidence from the governor and from other people that from law enforcement, the chief of police, and so on, that all of the vacation time was basically canceled. Every single officer who was available was being called onto the scene out in Louisville. And it just kept going on. And so there was a little bit light then, and as the sun goes down, things start to escalate. All right, so there's it looks like a civilian, didn't look like a law enforcement officer, who was just sort of running through the crowd, and the crowd is rightfully upset. We also learned that there were 2 officers who were shot. This happened very early in the night yesterday. So these 2 officers, Officer Aubrey Gregory and Robinson DeRoche, were actually involved in the shooting. They were both 2 members of the Louisville police force. They were injured around 8:30 p.m. This happened over at Broadway and Brook Street. Both say that that they're recovering, they're fine. One was shot in the abdomen, one was shot elsewhere in the hip. And the Chief Robert Schroeder, who is with the chief of police, he actually confirmed that they are going to be okay, which is good news. Obviously, I've got a lot of criticisms with how the prosecutor's office and how law enforcement in general works and how they handle these cases, but we certainly do not want anybody to be shooting at police officers, burning buildings down, or destroying property. That is not something that is productive. And the protests just continued to get out of hand. We're going to see here that there's some more breaking news.
That's right, Rick. LMPD confirming that 2 officers were shot this evening. One is alert and awake, and the other, meanwhile, at least earlier, was undergoing surgery. Both are at University Hospital, and one suspect is in custody. The officers were responding to shots fired when they were shot around 1st and Broadway. Now, LMPD was actually live streaming at the time the shots rang out, and here is that video.
Stay alive. Stay alive.
So you can hear those shots. See the police are shooting off the bullet bullets.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Good? Good. You all good?
I did.
And so it just continues to go on. We're seeing, honestly, this is starting to evolve into something that looks literally like a war zone. You see the police are shooting off so it looks like, a tear gas up into the air, and you hear the bullets going off each direction. We don't know who's firing where, who's firing first, what's going on, but the police, they hear the bullets and they just scatter. And this just continued on into the night. They did catch some more video footage after the fact. Let's take a look.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Good? Good. You all good?
I did.
Everybody here? Good?
So shots keep...
Are you good?
I did.
Out there. Fuck.
Where do
Where do you want us to go?
Right there. Right there. Right there. Officer down.
Yes. Yes. Okay. What do you want to do?
Hold.
Right here. Right here.
Hold. We got an
So
officer
more bullets are
down.
going off. More gunshots.
Officer down. Back.
Officer down. They're backing officers out.
Officer down. Take cover. Officer down. Take cover.
So obviously, not a good situation. They ended up rounding this guy up. His name is Lorenzo Johnson. He's charged with 14 counts of endangerment on police officers, 2 counts of assault on police officers. They're saying that he's not actually going to be arraigned or released out of custody. There's been a lot of these stories, especially on Twitter, from Andy NGO. He is saying that these people are being arrested and then released almost immediately with very low bonds. We've seen that happen a lot, but we've also seen some other judges who are really imposing extremely severe, highly high bonds, basically $2 million to get out of custody. Some other judges are saying $1 million. And here it's looking like this fellow, Lorenzo Johnson, is actually not going to be released. My understanding is there is a federal hold on him. So the feds are saying, no, we're not going to let this guy out because of the nature of the charges. And so we're not real sure what they're going to be charging him with or what the basis for keeping him in custody is. But, obviously we don't want people running around shooting at cops on the streets or anybody else for that matter. So the governor came out and actually said that he's got some commentary on this. We heard yesterday that he wants to see more of the information released, want to see more of what the grand jury makeup looked like, who was sitting in there during the grand jury indictment, and sort of what was really behind a lot of the other evidence that Daniel Cameron referenced yesterday. And so Governor Andy Beshear actually came out yesterday and has some other things he would like to share.
Hi, everyone. I know that with the events of today, many people are feeling powerful emotions, whether that's frustration, anger, concern. And many people have been out on the streets, especially in Louisville tonight, giving voice to those emotions. But sadly, we have seen at least one individual turn what were non-violent ways of expressing ourselves into the shooting of at least 2 law enforcement officers. We know that the answer to violence is never violence, and we are thinking about those 2 officers and their families tonight. So I'm asking everybody, please, go home. Go home tonight. There will be many times over the coming days where there will be an opportunity to be heard, and so many people are listening right now. As your governor, I've promised to listen. But let's make sure we don't see any more violence tonight. And let's make sure that we find ways of expressing ourselves moving forward where your point and other people's points are made. And that hopefully we can not just listen, but we can hear.
Okay.
Everybody out there, stay safe.
All right.
We care about each.
Pretty standard kind of a call to stand down, no more violence, and doesn't really ask for anything more than that. Was hopeful to get a little bit more out of the governor. Yes, we understand you're frustrated. My office is going to continue to do something, or we're going to wait until the FBI comes out, or whatever it is. He very bland, very controversial statement. I was expecting a little bit more out of him because yesterday we did hear that he wanted some more information about the underlying case and the underlying investigation, but none of that today or yesterday. It was just a call to go home and stop complaining. So, obviously as a governor, you got to do that and ensure peace and safety of your citizenry and your state. And so can't fault him on that. But we've seen some of the protesters, some of the rioters go wild and do some awful things like shooting other officers. But some of the cops also, they're not without fault in these situations. This happened over in Seattle. You may have seen this clip bouncing around on the internet, but we have a video that came from this gentleman on Facebook. His name is CJ Halliburton. He did a live stream yesterday. I did not watch the entire live stream, but there are some clips floating around. I just wanted to make sure that this fellow got some credit because he was out there in Seattle and he was doing a live stream on Facebook. And what he captured was a Seattle police officer literally riding over someone's head as they're injured on the ground. So here's what that looked like. Yeah, so just runs right over his head. Let's back that up. Right there. No reason for that. Looks like he's actually walking his bike. So he's not even riding it. Then he uses his bike to whack that protester. So there's no reason for that. No reason at all, right? I mean, the guy is laying on the ground. And then whacks him right, whacks that other protester. Now, there were a lot of people who were saying, well, those protesters were laying on the ground and they were trying to interfere with the police investigation. They were impeding what law enforcement was there to do. They were contributing to the disorder, and that cop was justified to, fight back. Don't see that at all. There was another clip that actually backs up a little bit further, and so we can see that this individual looks like he's injured on the ground. He's been lying on the ground for a long time. One of these protesters actually goes up to him to try to help him, to pull him out of the street, and the officers yell at him to back up, leave him alone, get out of there. So he goes there to try to help him. He's told to leave, and then a few minutes later, the cops actually just run the bike right over his head. So let's take a look at that. All right. So if you notice down at the bottom right, 145.
Hey, what's up with them?
So that was before. So he goes to help him. You okay? You okay? Nope, back up. Yeah, so then a few minutes later, the cop actually runs him over with the bike. So, not appropriate at all. Hopefully that officer gets a reprimand or gets disciplined for that behavior, because that is not anything that we like to see, especially if somebody's already on the ground and they're, significantly injured. We see some more chaos. These protesters out there are now taking Molotov cocktails and literally throwing it at officers. And that is not a good thing to be doing. All right. That is attempted murder. And it looks like somebody was actually rounded up. So let's take a look at that clip. Like I said, a lot of clips today. Then we're going to get into some legal analysis here in a minute. But we want to just sort of document this stuff. So let's take a look at the protesters throwing literal, incendiaries at the police.
Hey, fuck you!
There it is. Okay, now, if that hits a cop, that is not a good situation, right? They're going to be covered in flammable material. They are going to be literally burning on fire in their full uniforms, which are all wrapped around their bodies. They're hard to get off. So whoever gets hit with that is going to be maimed. They're going to be burned for life. They're going to, have scars. It's attempted murder is what it is. Now, I don't know about you, but I have sort of gotten desensitized to a little bit to these protester videos. I've seen so many of them that it almost, to me, it's almost starting to feel like a big game. Like these protesters think that they're just involved in something, they're just out there full of energy. They're just letting off some steam. Somebody thinks it's a good idea to throw a Molotov cocktail at somebody, not realizing that if it hits somebody, that there's a significant likelihood that it's going to kill that person. I don't know if they're making these connections, or maybe they are. Maybe they're actually intending to do that. Maybe they're actually intending to kill people. But it's hard to, I think, to watch a video like this and not put the severity, or not really identify with the intensity of what is happening, right? This is one person throwing an incendiary at somebody else with the likely intent, or with the likely result, regardless of whether they intended to or not, to kill somebody. And that is a big deal. And this is happening, multiple times in multiple locations across the country, and it has been for a very, very long time. And this is not productive to anything. It's not productive to criminal justice reform. It's not productive to Breonna Taylor and her legacy. It's not productive, in my mind, in terms of, any sort of, solving any of the racial inequities in our country. This is just violence. It's just street violence. It's just going to continue to escalate. And if people are throwing Molotov cocktails and cops are riding over people's heads, this is not good, right? This is going to continue to escalate until it doesn't. And unfortunately, these things don't end well when they keep trending in this direction. There's another angle of that Molotov cocktail. Let's take a look. So we can see here, they were looking at the individual who actually threw it, and then they ended up arresting this guy. So this guy was charged with possession of a destructive device, arson, and then, just like I thought, attempted murder. So his bond is going to be set at $250,000, $250 or $20,000 for the attempted assault. And so, this guy is now facing murder charges. And, the question, it's tragic in a lot of ways. I don't know what this guy's situation is. I don't know where he came from or what his life story is, but he is probably going to be in prison for a very long time, or for the rest of his life, because I think he probably got caught up in a movement that maybe he didn't really understand, or maybe he did. I don't know. But this is the result of it. He may have thought that he was going to go out there and have some fun and fight for the cause, and now he's probably going to spend a very long time in prison, which is just really unfortunate. We have other protesters hitting cops in the head with baseball bats. Did you see this clip going on? So again, another attempted murder type of a situation. This cop just barely gets up, and then he gets whacked right in the head with the baseball bat. And I mean, it's just, it's something that it's really awful to see. We don't want this happening to anybody on the streets. And so, I would echo the governor's request. Everybody just let's calm this down a little bit. It is actually doing more harm than good for any of the things that you want to accomplish out of criminal justice reform, out of this movement. When more people are getting injured, when more things are getting destroyed, we are going in the wrong direction. And this is coming from somebody who is sympathetic to the movement, somebody who started this channel way before any of this stuff was going on, somebody who's been very invested in this. We are going the wrong direction. Okay, now let's get back into the legal analysis for Breonna Taylor. So these were some of the issues that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. We were talking about some of these unanswered questions. Did Kenneth Walker shoot first? Did Kenneth Walker's bullet even hit John Mattingly? That was the first officer who went through the door. Both of those questions are sort of related to one another, but they're very interesting. We spent a lot of time yesterday clipping through Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General for Kentucky, his analysis and his statements, and then we have a statement from Kenneth Walker's attorney. So he was on CBS this morning. I think this was yesterday or maybe this morning. And this was, this is a gentleman out of Kentucky. He knows Kentucky law well, much better than I do. And he's offering a different version of the events, a different version of the analyses and the conclusions that would have taken place in Kentucky surrounding the Breonna Taylor case. So he's on the show, and they're actually talking about, well, let's just go to the clip and you'll see what we're talking about here. So this is Kenneth Walker's attorney. He's on a meeting here with this lady.
And unfortunately, it happens oftentimes in police shooting cases.
She's talking about self-defense.
Say, well, the police were acting in self-defense. The police do not have any higher right to self-defense than any ordinary citizen does in Kentucky.
Yeah, because Stephen, isn't your client saying he was acting in self-defense? When you listen to his 911 call, he clearly didn't know that they were police officers.
Absolutely not, and that is why the case was dismissed against him, was that he was reasonably acting in self-defense, and he's in his own residence, so he has a presumption that he's acting in self-defense.
Yeah, and this was something that was also news to me. So I covered this story way back when it happened. I think this was in early March, and I was really shocked that this was even unfolding this way. From my initial reading of the event, I thought that this was totally unjustified. The police had no reason to shoot Breonna Taylor. The argument was that they went in, Kenneth Walker fired the bullets down at the cops down the hallway, and then they fired back and they hit Breonna Taylor. But then they actually ended up charging Kenneth Walker, who they broke into his apartment, and they charged him with firing back at the cops. And I was thinking, well, if they weren't cops and if they didn't announce themselves, then those would have just been analogous to anybody breaking into your home. And of course you would fire back, right? That's why you have firearms. That's why we have the Second Amendment. It's to protect yourself and your home and protect your life, your liberty, and your property. And so that's all that Kenneth Walker was doing. What why were they charging him with murder? That didn't make any sense. They were the ones who initiated it and instigated it. And that's what the attorney is saying there. He's saying that actually after the case sort of unfolded over these last 6 months or so, the prosecutors agreed with that assessment. They said, yeah, he was acting in self-defense. And so they actually dismissed those charges against him. So if he, Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, was acting in self-defense and they dismissed the charges, then how are the officers claiming self-defense? And how are they now suddenly sort of justifying their shooting of Kenneth and Breonna Taylor? So they you know, the standard sort of progression of the case is they walk in and they start, or he starts firing at them. Therefore, they're in self-defense mode. They can fire back. But that's not really the situation, is what it's starting to sound like. The prosecutors are agreeing that Kenneth Walker was firing back at the officers because they dismissed his case. And so I wanted to confirm that, and it's 100% true. The judge signed the order that the motion to dismiss was granted. You can see here, sort of down at the bottom, that this happened a while back. So the original incident started in March, and this was dismissed a few months later in May. So you see down here, it was updated May 27th. Charges against Kenneth Walker, the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor, have been dismissed. And like I said, that's because Kentucky law is in favor of being able to protect yourself in your home, which is exactly what Kenneth Walker was doing. And we take a look at the actual statutes from Kentucky, and here is what they say. So I want to run you through. Now, again, this is a wall of text, but I'm going to read through it a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of synthesize it in a way that we can understand and discuss. So this is the use of physical force in law enforcement. This comes from the Kentucky statutes 503.090. And this is what it looks like. We're not talking about paragraph 1 up here. We're talking about this subsection here. The use of deadly physical force, which is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about non-deadly force, upon another person is justifiable only when the defendant, so we're talking about law enforcement. If law enforcement goes into your property, they're only allowed to use or deadly force when they are effecting the arrest authorized as a peace officer, and the arrest that they're conducting is for a felony involving the use or threatened use of physical force likely to cause death or serious physical injury. So what is the arrest for in this case? We don't even know. We don't even know what it is, because the warrant and the justification for all of that is being handled by the feds, and they were they're claiming that it had something to do with drugs or whatever it is, and they're saying that we don't even know why it is. But the point is, we don't know whether this criteria was met. Was the warrant for a felony involving the use or the threatened use of physical force? And then similarly, the defendant believes that the person to be arrested is likely to endanger human life unless being apprehended without delay. So do any of those criteria meet, or are any of those met for Kenneth Walker? We don't really know, but it doesn't look like that. No indication that he was being investigated for a felony that involved any use of physical force. There's no evidence that when he was sleeping at home in his bed with his girlfriend that he was likely to endanger human life unless he was apprehended. So there's really very little justification there, but there's also a lot that we don't know because the investigation files, all of the documents just have not been released. A lot of this stuff, including the grand jury, the indictment transcripts, and all of that information is still being held by the Attorney General in Kentucky. And we don't know what any of that says. So we can't come to a good conclusion on that. If it was just drugs, I don't think that's a real good reason. That doesn't meet that threshold. Being in possession of drugs, being a drug dealer, transporting drugs by itself is not something involving the threatened use of physical force or any type of activity that would be likely to cause death or serious physical injury. And that's just under the Kentucky statutes. When we go forward, we'll see that there's another statute that says, so we're going to kind of put the different hat on, and we're going to say, well, what if you're Kenneth Walker? And what if you are in your home and these cops blow through your door? Are you allowed to do anything against them, right? If you have these 3 people who are breaking into your home in the middle of the night and they haven't done such a great job of announcing that they're law enforcement or they have a lawful order, what can you do about that? Kenneth Walker was in his home. So what statute would he look to? What statute was his attorney referring to? I believe it's this one. He's saying it under 503.055, the use of defensive force regarding a dwelling. Okay, so Kenneth Walker is in a dwelling, and this statute from Kentucky says this: a person is presumed to have reasonable fear of imminent peril or death or great bodily harm to himself or herself when using defensive force that is intended so basically using a gun, if the person against whom the defensive force was used was in the process of unlawfully and forcibly entering or had unlawfully and forcibly entered into a dwelling. So that's that criteria. That's met right there. So this statute is saying that that Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor, they are presumed to have reasonable fear. So just sitting in their home, minding their own business, they're allowed to just presume. We don't even have to prove that they had fear of imminent peril or death. We can just say, sure, of course they had it. They were in their residence and somebody was breaking into it. So we've got this part here that says, against whom the defensive force was used, and they're in the process of unlawfully and unforcibly breaking into their property. And this is a two-part statute. So it says the person who uses that firearm, in this case, knew or had reason to believe that the forcible entry was unlawful or that a forcible act was occurring or had occurred. So we have no indication thus far, other than the one officer's word that they actually announced that they were law enforcement. But everybody else we're going to get to in a little bit. There's sort of like 12 neighbors that all don't recall the police ever announcing anything. So the statute goes on, and we're going to see here that you can enjoy this presumption. You can say this is all presumed. Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor, they all get to enjoy these protections, but they don't get the protections if this subsection applies. So the law actually carves out some statutes here, or some exceptions to this rule. So under paragraph 2, you'll see I just started with D because I just clipped this out, but there's A, B, and C. There's other things where this rule won't apply to you. And one of the rules where this use of reasonable force doesn't apply is when there is an officer. So we look at this statute. It says you can't use defensive force against a peace officer if they try to enter into your residence in the performance of his or her official duties, and the officer identified himself or herself in accordance with the law, or the person using the force, so in this case Kenneth Walker, knew or reasonably should have known that the person entering or attempting to enter was a peace officer. So this is saying, and this is why this identification part is so important. We're going to spend a little time talking about, did they announce that they were officers? If they did, and Kenneth heard that or knew about that, then he would not have the opportunity to use this force for those people breaking in, because he would have heard them, and he would have said, okay, that's an officer. He didn't know that. I don't have the 911 call here, but if you have not listened to it yet, go listen to the 911 call from Kenneth, and you can make the judgment for yourself. When he's on the phone calling the police, if he thought the police were there in his apartment, do you think that he would have picked up the phone and called the police? Or did maybe he think that they were somebody else because they didn't fail to announce who they were? They say they did. He says that they didn't. And whose word are you going to take for it? There's something called sort of an excited utterance, or spontaneous admissions. These are rules of hearsay, and these are not really important. I'm sort of off on a tangent with that. But what we're talking about is the reliability of certain evidence. You have an officer who's being investigated for possible murder. They're all saying, yeah, of course we announced. We announced everything. We announced loudly. We announced clearly. We announced very often. We used a friggin' bullhorn. We covered that. And then you have other people who say, not so fast. You've got Kenneth Walker who calls 911. And when you listen to that call, you can answer yourself. Does it sound like somebody who is dealing with the police? He calls and he says, hey, they just shot my people broke in. They just shot my girlfriend. He's very fearful for his life because he didn't know that they were cops, because maybe they didn't announce it. And so when you start to look about the reliability of evidence, you're asking yourself, which one's more reliable? Somebody who just calls 911 and says exactly what's happening around them. He just picks up the phone. He says, this is what I'm seeing literally right now. Somebody broke in. They just shot my girlfriend. Please send help. Okay, that is what we call a spontaneous utterance, or an excited utterance. It's a statement that is made in the heat of the moment, so we can say it's probably pretty reliable. If somebody is in the middle of a really high intensity situation and the cops come breaking in and there's gunshots going around, we as lawyers and as just human beings, we tend to give statements made during that period of time more reliability, because in the heat of that moment, you don't have a lot of opportunity to sit there and concoct a plan. So Kenneth Walker didn't have a lot of time to say, I just shot at that officer, and I know it's an officer, and I think I hit him. And so now what I need to do is call 911, because I need to make believe that that I didn't even think that they were officers, and that way I escape liability. Like, that wasn't happening. That wasn't going through his thought process. He was reacting instinctively. So from our perspective, somebody who makes a statement like that, that's a lot more reliable than somebody who's being investigated for murder charges, who's just needing to sort of cover for themselves by making statements that are self-serving. So which one's more reliable? Did they knock and announce or not? You can make your own conclusion on that. But we have more information from Kenneth Walker's attorney, and he says that there really weren't any good witnesses. Let's take a look. Actually, I think that's the wrong clip. Give me 1 second.
The issue of self-defense.
Okay, here is the no witnesses clip from Kenneth Walker's attorney.
We've got a dozen neighbors who were interviewed by police as well, who said they never heard the police announce that they were police. There's no question they were beating on the door, but they never announced as police. Attorney General Cameron said, well, the two police said they announced. So we're going to start taking the word of the targets of the investigation as exculpatory.
But they also said, Stephen, they also said they had a witness who said that they heard the police announce themselves.
Yes, and that witness, Gail, was interviewed by the police 3 days after this happened initially. And he stated, I did not, exact words, did you hear them announce as police? He said, I never heard anyone announce as police. He was subsequently interviewed 2 more times over the next month by law enforcement, LMPD law enforcement, and he eventually says, yeah, I may have heard them announce they were police. In fact, I saw a uniformed police officer. That's after the shooting had already occurred.
Yeah, and so this type of stuff happens all the time in criminal law. You want to get witness statements immediately, as soon as you can after the incident happens, because memories fade. We know this. Psychiatrists, psychologists, academia, everybody knows this, that when you are in an intense traumatic situation, your mind can only absorb so much information, and then further down the road, you start to fill in the gaps, and you start to just piece it all together. There's missing parts of the puzzle, and you say, yeah, that makes sense, because your mind needs to craft a story so that you don't spiral out of control because your cognitive dissonance is not, jerking you in every which direction. So your mind will sort of create a story. And if you have law enforcement officials who are constantly asking you the same questions, you sure you didn't hear him announce? You sure you didn't hear him announce? Your apartment's right there. You said that you were here at 2 a.m. You said you were coming home from the bar. You sure you weren't there when they were there? It sounds like you might have heard them. You want to double check that? Do you have any, so the cops just keep going and going and going and going until somebody finally says, all right. Geez, you're right. I got it. Yeah, I did. I saw it. Okay. I saw the cop. Leave me the hell alone. I'm tired of being involved in this case. It's a national story. I got, 10 officers breathing down my neck for 3 months down the road. Yeah, I saw it. Leave me the hell alone. And this happens all the time, and there's a lot of case law. There's a lot of procedures around this. These are issues that we have, litigated. Issues like this have gone to the Supreme Court, and they've had, we have all sorts of bias and improper sort of, hints and innuendo that cause people to change their statements. You see this, one of the most common examples of this would be like a lineup. So oftentimes what they'll do is they'll put, 3 to 6 images on a piece of paper, and they'll just, put that in front of somebody, and they'll say, identify this person. And you look at that, you've seen the lineups in the movies where they'll, walk a bunch of bodies across, and they'll say, hey, point out the one who did it. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen there where, officers are sort of encouraging people to find a certain way, helping to persuade them one direction versus another. And we hear about it in popular media. We call it gaslighting, and we hear about this stuff all the time. So this guy's defense attorney, Kenneth Walker's defense attorney, he says here in that video, he said, I quote, I didn't hear them announce that they were officers. And so presumably he's got the same documents that the Attorney General has. Now, none of these people can release them to the public, but there must be some indication that 3 days after the original incident occurred, the police got a statement from the only key witness that they're relying on, who said 3 days later that I didn't hear them announce. Then several months later, after the peppering of the investigation, after this goes on and on and on, they come back and he says, yep, all right, fine, I admit it. So his story changes a little bit, but we didn't hear about the change. We just heard about that second story. And if you listen in depth at the actual press conference, if you go to the New York Times website or the New York Times, whatever, they did one of their pool reporters was there during the press conference yesterday in Louisville, and she asked a question. She said, hey, by the way, you said you had a witness. We interviewed like everybody in the entire apartment complex. We didn't have anybody ever confirm for us that they actually knocked and announced. We know that they knocked, but did they announce? So she doesn't have any indication of it. This defense attorney doesn't have any indication of it. Everybody interviewed everybody in that whole friggin' zip code, and there's only one person who said that they did announce, and that story actually changed. This defense attorney says 3 days after, it was one story. A couple months later, it was a different story. So again, the reliability of the evidence. We have Kenneth Walker's statement saying that they didn't announce. We have a self-serving officer who said that they did announce. And then we have a witness whose story flip-flopped both ways. Yesterday, we were talking about the grand jury, and we were talking about the fact that the prosecutor, yes, they'd like to go out in front of the media and say, listen, we're neutral arbiters, okay? We don't do anything to bias the panel one way or the other. The only thing that we're doing is just gathering evidence, and we're just presenting evidence. But if they hold key pieces of evidence back, like if they don't tell the grand jury that the witness story changed on the third day, he said they didn't announce, but 2 months later, they did announce. If the grand jury, did they hear that? Do they know that evidence? Do they know anything about that? Or did the officer refuse, or did the prosecutor refuse to present that material to them so that they could make an informed decision? We don't know because none of the documents are out. You see how this works? They like to go out and tell you sort of this selective bit of evidence, but they don't want to tell you the full story. And there's this defense attorney, he's only on the show if you haven't seen the full clip, I would encourage you to watch it because he condenses a lot of information in a short period of time. And I really don't like the news format because of this. He really can't articulate his points fully. I mean, I'm talking, I can take one of his 30-second clips and just expand on it for 20 minutes because I talk way too much. That's why I do this show. But this is somebody who clearly knows the law a lot better than I do in Kentucky, and he's got some good arguments. I would like to see in the future, if possible, more of this type of media facing sort of public awareness surrounding these cases. I would like to see this guy get a lot more than 4 minutes. I would like to see him start a YouTube channel and get everybody's permissions, Kenneth Walker's permission, get approval from the state bar or whatever regulatory agencies he's got to deal with in Kentucky, get permission to go out there and tell the full story, because there's so much more here that we just don't know. And just listening to him for about 5 minutes, we start to see that there are some pretty big gaps in a lot of this material, which we suspected, but it's good to confirm from somebody who's actually working on the case. So Daniel Cameron from the Attorney General's office, he got a whole press conference and tons of news coverage. But what about the defense? Don't they deserve an opportunity to maybe come and share their side of the story? Or is Kentucky like Arizona, where a lot of this material is actually protected? It's all confidential. We can't talk a lot about it. We can't disclose it outside of the criminal court. There are prosecuting agencies who will give us things, and then they'll stamp right across it. They'll say, oh, you can't disclose this outside of any law enforcement or criminal defense agencies or any of those things. If you do, you're subject to discipline. So we can't even we can be looking at material and say, yeah, this is a huge problem. This is a big problem. I want to just spread this around the internet. Can't do that because there are rules in place. Now, I don't know if that's the same case out of Kentucky. Probably is. But if this guy's sitting on material and he looked at the case file and he knows this is a big problem and he can't do anything about it, it's very frustrating, and I empathize with him. But my point is, I would like to see more material from him. All right, we have one more clip speaking of this fellow, and he has another point about not being able to claim self-defense when we're talking about third parties. So, for example, In the Breonna Taylor case, let's say that John Mattingly enters into the residence and he feels like he is under duress. According to him, Kenneth Walker is shooting first. He takes that bullet and then he fires back. That would be his version of self-defense. He's saying Kenneth is the aggressor and he is firing back. Even though Kenneth's case was completely dismissed. All those charges were gone. They originally charged him with murder. They reviewed it and said, no, he actually was acting in self-defense. So they dismissed those charges. But if the cop is going to turn around and claim the envelope of self-defense protection, is he also allowed, does that protection extend into Breonna Taylor? In other words, can he fire at Kenneth Walker, hit Breonna Taylor, and use the same defense, the doctrine of self-defense, to relieve him of any criminal liability? And this criminal defense attorney from Kentucky says no, and we have the statute to support it. So let's take a look at what he has to say. Here he is. Let's play this. Well, I don't know why it's not playing. So we're not going to hear from him, but he explains the statute.
The issue of self-defense justification in Kentucky law does not apply when you kill a third party. If they're acting in self-defense on Kenneth Walker, as they claim, they don't get to kill Breonna Taylor as well.
All right.
And that's the law. So
yeah, and it's pretty I think pretty straightforward from some of the statute here. So we've got the protection of another statute. So this comes from 503070 out of Kentucky. And again, we're talking about deadly physical force. So under paragraph 2 here, it says the use of deadly physical force by a defendant upon another is justifiable when the defendant believes that such force is necessary to protect a third person against imminent death. All right, so let's put our hats on for both individuals here. Let's put on the Kenneth Walker hat. If you are Kenneth Walker and you are in your home and you believe that you have 3 people who are breaking into your home and firing bullets into your house, you can use deadly force upon another person when to protect. So in other words, Kenneth Walker could use this to protect Breonna Taylor if he believed that it was necessary to protect her against imminent death. I think it's very reasonable, right? They're home alone in bed. 3 people break in, and he says, I could use it to defend against anybody going to hurt Breonna Taylor. And he does not have a duty to retreat if he's in a place where he has the right to be. So now let's flip that. Let's put the hat on the officer. We can say Officer John Mattingly. Is he in a position where he thinks it's necessary to protect a third person against imminent death? So that could potentially be his other officers, and this does not apply to him, well, presumably, if he did not announce. So a lot of this stuff is going to hang on the announcement part of this. If he didn't announce and he was required to do so under the warrant, and that was part of his obligation in terms of getting access into the residence, then he would not have been there lawfully, and he would have had a duty to retreat, and none of these protections would have been applicable to him because he would have been sort of breaking that self-defense purview. We talked about the presumption, so we know that Kenneth Walker was in his home. They dismissed the case because he had the presumption of self-defense. So if he has that presumption, then it's not likely that that is going to apply to the officers. So if the officers then are not where they're supposed to be lawfully, they don't have any of the self-defense privileges, they are not entitled to escape criminal liability as a result of their shootings. They're just not allowed to do that because the self-defense protection doctrines don't apply. So what this attorney was ultimately saying in the clip that I couldn't play is that they all should have been indicted. In other words, the prosecutor should have presented this evidence to them and explained the rules and explained the law and explained some of these variables. And we would have liked to have seen the grand jury actually indict all 3 of the officers, and then they can go through the same process that any other person charged with a crime can go through. The presumption of innocence, the right to confront your accusers, the right to cross-examine your witnesses, the right to, submit exhibits and have a jury trial, and they can have the self-defense discussion independently inside the court system. So according to this attorney in Kentucky, the doctrine of self-defense is not something that is decided by a prosecutor. It's decided by a jury. So they get to listen to the facts and they get to decide on the self-defense issue. But right now, within a grand jury proceeding, the defense does not get, or in this case, sort of the defense, but kind of the prosecution, right? The people who were on the side of Kenneth Walker, on the side of Breonna Taylor, when the government is presenting evidence to the grand jury, it's just the prosecutor and the grand jury. The other party doesn't get to be involved in that discussion. So Kenneth Walker's lawyer or Breonna Taylor's lawyer during this indictment process, and Daniel Cameron said this several times yesterday, that it's a secret proceeding. He can't talk about what's happening in it because it's secret. That means that all of the other parties are not involved in it. So they don't get to present any evidence. So everything that we just heard from Kenneth Walker's attorney, none of that presumably was presented during the grand jury. It may have been, but we don't know because the attorney general is not going to release any of the grand jury testimony, any of the transcripts, or any of that evidence. He's already indicated as much. And finally, on Breonna Taylor, before we move forward and move on to the SCOTUS HQ update, the 2020 Supreme Court horse race, I wanted to share something that I read yesterday, which was one of these things. I read it and I thought, oh, that's such a beautiful way to frame this entire situation. It's not exactly, accurate, but it's a good way to frame this situation. And it's something that I kind of wish I had thought of. Once I saw it, I was like, oh, that's it. That's brilliant. So somebody wrote on Reddit, and I tried to find the user who actually posted it, but I saw it on one of the forums over there that I follow. And he said something like this. He said, Hankison was charged for not shooting Breonna. He was criminally charged because he didn't actually hit her with the bullets. If he would have hit her with the bullets, then he wouldn't have been charged with a crime. He was charged with a crime because he was firing like a lunatic. But had he actually hit her, would that have sort of brought him within the envelope of the criminal defense doctrine that these other two officers who presumably absolutely did shoot her, they're getting off on that because their bullets connected with her body. Hankison's bullets, because he's a bad shot or whatever, apparently didn't connect with her body. But we can't even speak that far. We don't even really know that. We do know, according to the Attorney General's testimony yesterday, that they are telling us, according to the FBI crime lab, that one of the bullets from Mile Cosgrove hit and actually was fatal to Breonna. So that must have been somewhere in the chest, caused her to bleed out, caused her to die. But what about the other bullets? Where did those 5 other bullets come from? Where did they go? Who shot them? And quite frankly, because we're talking about Hankison, who is such a reckless weapons operator, somebody who is shooting all over the place, bullets going into a neighbor's apartment, endangering 3 people, for which he has been indicted on those charges. If he's firing so recklessly, how do we know that he didn't actually fire a bullet that hit John Mattingly? We don't know that. I mean, we should, right? If the FBI, it sounds like the Kentucky Crime Lab couldn't actually trace where any of the bullets came from or where they went, but we do know that they can trace some bullets because one of the bullets went into Breonna Taylor's, and they traced that from Mile Cosgrove's gun. There was some discussion yesterday about the different calibers of the bullets, but we don't really know. They didn't exclude that Brett Hankison's bullets never went into Breonna Taylor's body. Because if it did, then that opens the door for some other arguments. Either he is immune from criminal liability because he was within the criminal defense or the self-defense doctrine that is enveloping the other 2 officers, or he's not inside that doctrine, and maybe that pulls them out of it as well. So maybe it pulls them more towards the murder side. So it's a very interesting case. This would be a lot easier to analyze if we had some documents, but nobody wants to release them, rightfully so. I think what's happening in this case is everybody is trying to make this go away as quickly as possible. We saw that Breonna Taylor's attorney, I saw a statement that he made, which was extremely weak in my opinion, but he needs to keep his mouth shut because they just settled for, I think, $12 million. So he's probably taken a good third or a fourth of that. He's probably, making off with $3 to $4 million, maybe less than that. I don't know the official story on that. That's just speculating, so I could be wrong. Fact check me on that. But, it's a big payday. Part of that settlement presumably is going to be to not badmouth, to sort of leave this alone. Or maybe he's just, a person of integrity and he says, look, we settled this case. I'm going to be done with it. I'm not going to continue to throw any fuel on this fire. But his statement was pretty weak. He said after the announcement came out, he said something like, well, well, we didn't get everything we wanted, but, that's just kind of how the game works. You're like, all right, his portion of this case is settled. This other defense attorney for Kenneth Walker, his part of the case is settled. Kenneth Walker's case was dismissed. The 2 officers who are responsible for putting, 6 bullets in Breonna Taylor's body, they're not going to get charged. The other guy, Brett Hankison, who we don't know where his bullets went. One of his bullets may have hit Breonna. We don't know. They didn't do the analysis, or if they did, they didn't come to any concrete conclusions about that. And so I think this investigation is mostly over. Very unsatisfying in my mind. I've seen a lot of people who are very upset about this case, but sort of for the wrong reasons. We were talking about it today here at our office, sort of around the water cooler, and I do my very best to stay off of social media, but they're telling me that a lot of people are posting these comments that, saying things like, these officers were part of a gang, and they were standing over Breonna Taylor as they were shooting her. They were shooting her while she was sleeping in bed, and all of those things. You haven't seen any evidence of that. And this case is bad enough. These types of things are bad enough without the hyperbole. We don't need to go into, manufacturing all of these different facts about a case where none of those facts happened, or if they did, there's no evidence for it. So when I see people from both sides, there are people, all over the place. I think Tommy Lauren or somebody like that, puts out this blast on her social media today saying something about, it was a lawful warrant and it was an accurate warrant and the police had every right to be there. And these people are drug dealers, and Breonna Taylor was, running money from Cuba, and all these really bizarre, just far out there ideas. And, Tommy's not a lawyer. She doesn't know what the warrant says. We don't even know what the warrant says, because the feds are still responsible for that investigation. So, there's a lot more here, but everybody is pretending like they know how this stuff works, including myself. I'm commenting here on this channel about a lot of things that I don't have the full picture on, but I'm doing my best to add value and to not go into hyperbole, to not encourage people to go burn things down and shoot officers, because that is not the answer. We can have both things. We can say we're angry, we're upset about this stuff, we want to see some criminal justice reform, but we can have a meaningful conversation about it, and we can move the ball forward in a way that is not going to be ruining our own society in which we live. So that is it for Breonna Taylor today. We're going to continue to follow this story. Now, I don't know, we have a calendar of cases that we follow along. I'm going to share that with you today at the end of the show. So we call it our docket, our high profile cases docket. I don't know that there's going to be anything else on this case. We're going to see what happens with these protests. I'm already seeing a lot of the mainstream media sort of push this stuff by the wayside. Nobody really wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to sort of put a suppression on it. Nobody just wants to talk about it. And I understand that, but we're going to talk about it. And if there's more that we learn, if I see more information, if there's more material, if the grand jury documents leak or whatever happens, we'll make sure to cover it here on this show. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. Now is a good time to take a quick pause and look at the comments before we transition over into the SCOTUS 2020 news. We have a little bit of news today. Today's mostly Breonna Taylor stuff, but we do have the 2020 news. We're looking who is going to be seated here. Who is going to take this seat? That was Miss Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is no longer with us. And so we're going to talk about that here in a quick moment. Let's take a look at the chat. Actually, nope, that didn't work. I thought I had integrated the chat box onto my live stream like some of those really sophisticated YouTubers do, but I am just not that sophisticated yet. I am going to try to figure out how to do that at some point. All right, we got a couple comments here. We've got one from King Brandon. He says, I'm just so tired of people calling for the blood of cops when the real issue is with the law the cops are following. I agree with that. I agree with that a lot. I think there are a lot of good officers who are in a department that has a lot of cultural problems, but they're good people, and we want good people in law enforcement. We want to encourage them to stay. We want to get rid of the bad people, but we want the good people to stay there. And we want to, also sort of untie their hands and give them a little bit more leeway and a little bit more freedom and a little bit more discretion to deal with people like humans. A lot of the rules of engagement, a lot of the policies that these cops have to follow are, in my mind, appropriate for Fallujah or for, a war zone. They're not appropriate for civilian streets, but they're sort of required to engage in certain activities that I think are sort of demeaning or degrading or diluting humanity in a lot of ways. But we do want the good cops to stay. We can't, the more we bad mouth the cops and call for the blood of cops, the good ones are going to bail. They're going to say, enough of this, man. I don't need to do this stuff. And they're going to bail and they'll go find something else and productive to do. So by asking and by demanding that we're going to be defunding all of the cops, I think it's doing more harm than good. And I would like to see that, like to see those calls stop. All right. A couple of other, let's see here. Correct. Zulu Zite says no such thing as cops abusing cover of law. Zulu Zite, hey, good to see you, my friend. It's been a long time. You've been around here for a long time, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your loyal participation here. It's very nice to have people here. Let's see. The Taylor case was never about race. And this is something I agree with a lot, actually. If you'll notice, I mean, when I do my analysis on these things, I don't even mention race. White cops, black woman. It has nothing to do with that. It's cops versus people. Cops versus civilians. There are a lot of people who say, yeah, it's all about race and all of that. I see that. I get it. I understand your plight. When I said, it's not something that it has nothing to do with it, I think that's an overstatement. I think there is probably a racial component to it, but it's a bigger issue than that in my mind. It's cops. It's bad police. It's bad prosecutors. It's a corrupt justice system. It's a bad cultural problem. And it's these people who are doing this to civilians. I see it every day. The stories that make the news are white cops versus black victims. But this is happening every day across the board to everybody. Blacks, Hispanics, whites, Asians, everybody just across the board. And it's not all cops, but it's enough that we're talking about it. And it's enough that we have to deal with it. And you can say that it's not a race issue, and you can say, BLM is totally unjustified and they're out of control, and you can make those arguments, and you can say there's no basis for how they're feeling or for what they're doing, but they're doing it. And this is an issue that we have to deal with, whether we agree with them or not. There needs to be a conversation about this. The conversation can't take place when they're burning buildings down and killing people. So we're hopeful that maybe we can sort of settle things down and have a real productive conversation. That's all we're trying to do on this show. All right, let's see. Let's hop back into the comments, see what else we got. Before we go into the Supreme Court stuff, we've got, what do you think of Jake Gardner? I think it's Jake Gardner. Is there a case for his family? That is not one that I have looked at, actually. I have not looked at the Jake Gardner case. My understanding is another tragedy. This was a situation where I think briefly, and I don't want to speak too much out of turn, but there was a business owner who was sort of confronted by a mob, and then he, I think, attacked that guy, or he was defending himself. He ended up not being charged, and then later being charged because of a political prosecution, and he unfortunately died by suicide. And this is actually a great time for me to tell you about a little thing that I have going on in my life. So in 2016, I lost my little brother to suicide, much like Jake Gardner. Lost him to suicide after a long struggle with drugs. He broke his wrist as a young man multiple times. He had a number of different surgeries on his wrist. He was being prescribed pain pills, lots of the opioids for a long period of time. And we all know, anybody who had anything to do with addiction know how this story goes. The pain pills, of course, turns into heroin, and he struggled with that for a very long time. And in 2016, we lost him, and he's no longer with us. But my family has done what we can to make the best of the situation. So we started a foundation called ericshouse.org. My mom runs that organization. And today we're doing it's between now and October, we're doing this big, this fundraising event. It's the one thing that we do annually every year. So if you have if you have $1, $5, I put the link to my page, a part of a fundraising organization called Give Butter, and they do amazing work over there. Everything goes back into services, but it's basically, the organization is set up to help people who've lost somebody to suicide or addiction, like an overdose, or a tragic death. So there's a lot of people who are part of this organization. They lost, their 14-year-old daughter in an ATV accident or something like that. So, tragic death. And when you lose somebody like that in your life, you really feel alone. My family and I, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know who to talk to or who to communicate with or what to do next. And so ericshouse.org is an organization to help people really just join a community and grieve together and help them move forward, because sometimes, losing a brother like I did, it really messed me up for a number of years. And I was only able to heal when I got plugged in and when I started being of service to other people and helping that next person who also lost somebody, help them understand and move forward. So if you had a situation where you know somebody like that, or if you're struggling like that, or if this is an issue that's personal to you and you have a couple bucks you want to contribute over to Eric's House, it's a registered 501c3. It's all tax deductible. They do great work over there. So enough on that, but the link is down below. So if you have anything that you can contribute would be very, very helpful. Thank you so much for doing that. And thanks for asking that question. So let's take a look over the Supreme Court news, because it's SCOTUS time. We got SCOTUS HQ. Going to change gears just a little bit. Don't have a lot on this because the news is not particularly interesting today, but we do know that there are some more details that are getting filled in. So let's talk about that. The Trump administration is now indicating that they are going to try to have this wrapped up very soon. So when we look here, they are sort of fleshing out a timeline for us. They're saying the Supreme Court nominee may start the Senate hearing in October 12th. So that's just a couple weeks out, which will be pretty soon. Then they're going to look to have a final vote in the full Senate by October 26th. And they've got nothing official just yet. So coming up soon, they're going to really try to cram this thing home. October 26th, I mean, that's just I think a week before the election, literally a week before, about a week and a half before the election. So it's going to be very contentious. They are going to run this thing up all the way until the end of the line. And I think that they're going to be successful because they have the numbers. It's just how that works. We also see here that this is the markets. Let's hit the markets. Amy Coney Barrett is on top as always. She's actually going even more on top. So the gap between her and Barbara Lagoa on predictit.org, those are all, the gap is widening. None of these other people are even close. Allison Rushing yesterday, she was at 3%, I think, and now she's down to 1% again. And we can see some of the movements over the last week or so. And Amy Coney Barrett is just still rising top to the top. And so what I take from this is the way that I interpret this data is I think it's just sort of a good way to sort of cumulatively see what the zeitgeist is feeling right now. What's everybody on Twitter saying and feeling? What is the general population? What is their perspective on this thing? Looking like Amy Coney Barrett is running away with this. Everybody else, Allison Rushing was not even on the chart anymore. All these people have just dropped off. And so Barbara Lagoa, my understanding was that she was not going to be meeting with President Trump, but that is not the case. I read that she was going to be meeting with him this Friday, which is interesting because the actual announcement is going to be on Saturday. So we'll see what Trump does on Saturday. He's a showman, so he may do like he may have everybody there and he'll just, do the Apprentice style, open the doors. Hey, it's Coney Barrett. So we'll see how that works. I have a question. Would it be worthwhile to live stream that Supreme Court nomination hearing? I've never done sort of a companion live stream. In other words, I would be here joining you with the live stream. So I would have it up and we would do a picture-in-picture and we would see what the announcement is, and then we can almost do some commentary in real time. Would that be worthwhile? Would anybody want to join in on that? Let me know in the comments if there's any interest. I may go ahead and do it because I will probably be watching it anyways with bated breath. And so we go back into the metrics. Let's take a look. It looks like we have no changes in terms of where the senators are going to be lying. So we still have, it looks like it's going to be 51, maybe 52 to 48. So it's 51 on here, but I think Lisa Murkowski is going to bring that over to 52 based on the latest news that we have from her. And then this is our docket for October. So we are going to be filling this up. So we've been covering a lot of cases here. We're going to start getting them organized onto a calendar. So this is what October is looking like. Remember, tomorrow, I don't have tomorrow's date on here, but Kyle Rittenhouse has his extradition hearing tomorrow. That is on the 25th. I don't know what time that is. That case is going to happen over in Illinois. We've got the McCloskeys coming up on the 6th in October. Next week, we have the presidential debate on Tuesday, which I am very excited about. I know Chris Wallace has announced what he's the moderator for the campaign or for the event, and he has explained that there's going to be a lot of issues about criminal justice reform. A lot of the time, those issues don't make the debates because they're not important to the country, but they're very important now. So we've got that. We've got the tentative confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court, and then we've got a tentative confirmation vote. Those days are going to be subject to change. The McMichaels, the Ahmaud Arbery case, we covered that one a long time ago as well. They are going to be having a discovery deadline. So this is not actually a court date, but this is just a deadline, meaning that both parties have to exchange discovery with one another. So the defense has to give everything to the prosecutors have to give everything to the defense. We covered that previously, but the Arbery's, there's like 300 or 400 gigabytes of data, interviews, photos, all sorts of stuff. So the defense asked for a little bit more time, which I think was reasonable. The judge didn't give him a ton of time, said you got to get it done by the end of October. So we'll see what happens there as well. And that is what we've got for the show today. Let's take a look back at some of the comments, see if there's anything else. Anybody has any other questions about this? So Zulu says, I don't care what you trust. For someone who preaches nonsense about judgment, you don't do your credibility any favors. Okay. All right. Good stuff. Let's see. I don't speak to trolls. Yes, you should. So Teresa Childs says she would join in. Dr. Moses says yes. Nope. I read their signs in this live stream announcement or the confirmation hearing. So I would start with the live stream announcement. So I would just do the announcement, and then we would have a discussion about it. So we would know literally right as it happens, and then I would just start looking stuff up on Twitter. If it's Amy Coney Barrett, we know a lot about her. We've covered her a lot on this channel. But if it's another one of these judges, it may, we may be going through the experience together. Who is this person? Where'd they come from? What school did they go to? What's their position on these issues? Maybe learning it in real time as it's happening. So I thought it would be fun, but I'd never done it, and I don't want to talk over what's going on and be quiet. So it could be weird and awkward, but we may just try it because it kind of does sound fun. So Zulu was saying that wasn't for me. That was for a troll. Appreciate that, my friend. Kevin Sharp says, how hard was law school? I don't think it was anything too grueling, quite frankly. Now, I didn't go to a particularly good school, but it was, it's case law. The harder things are sort of the amount of material. The material itself is not super hard. The amount of it is so much. I mean, you're reading just hundreds of pages a night. When you study for the bar exam, I passed the bar in Arizona and in California. The Arizona bar exam is 2 days, and it's about 6 hours each day. You've got 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon for 2 days. California, it's the same structure, except it's 3 days. So it's almost like an educational decathlon. Like, you just have to be mentally able to produce a lot of work and read a lot of stuff and analyze and process a lot of things. But the material itself is not super complicated. I mean, if you can understand some basic problem solving and memorize a lot of statutes and stuff like that, I don't think it's particularly hard. The reading is why I didn't go to law school. It is a lot of reading. Honestly, I tell people this all the time. They're like, hey, what are you reading right now? I'm like, I don't read books anymore. Why? Because I read enough of them in law school. I'm over it. I'm over the books. I do a lot of reading, but it's mostly the audible stuff. A huge Audible fan. So how about a segment on the Floyd cop? From what I saw, he followed the exact procedures, and Floyd autopsy said no damage to neck, and Floyd was complaining he couldn't breathe long before on the ground. Yeah, we are following the Floyd stuff. So last I heard, there was we're due up for an update on the George Floyd stuff. I think we covered this last week. So there's usually an update about once a month on all these cases. The George Floyd case has been interesting, and we're due up for an update on that because the last time we were analyzing this, the prosecutor's office actually was fighting to not get disqualified from the case. So there was an oral argument that happened at some point. It was a Friday afternoon, and something happened in court. We don't know what, but the judge basically excluded the entire prosecutor's office. Just said, no, you don't get, you guys are gone. And on Monday morning, the prosecutor's office filed a response and said, basically, you can't kick us off this case. And they listed all their reasons. So we did a lot of analysis on that in previous videos. Somebody else also asked about Lisa Murkowski. And so we covered that yesterday on this channel. Lisa Murkowski's, she sort of walked back her statement. So she didn't indicate that she would be supporting the nominee, but she said in her original statement right after Ginsburg died, she said, I am not going to be, fair is fair. We're not going to be voting this cycle because the election is so close. And she said she was going to wait. Then a couple days went by and she says, well, now I'm going to consider it. So I moved her back over into the Republican column. We don't know if she's going to actually vote or not, but she has indicated, or at least her statements are walking that back. I'm going to guess she went back over to her constituents in her district or in her state, and she probably got an earful, which is why she wanted to modify her position a little bit, which I think is the right call. I mean, how can you make a decision when you haven't even heard who the nominee is? Right? It's putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I don't understand how Kenneth had time to ring 911 if the cops were there. Body cam should be mandatory. So I think the cops were detectives, who oftentimes don't need to wear the body cameras. The body cameras are usually, and I think they were in plain clothes also. So the body cameras or the head cameras, those would have been very bulky and they would have sort of given them away. I don't know the details there, but I certainly agree with you. I think body cameras should be on every officer all the time, everywhere. They're so small now. Even a lot of the officers in Scottsdale, they have cameras that are on their glasses, and they will actually connect down. So they're very, very not bulky. There's a lot of very cool technology out there. Let's see what else we got. Well, listen, it is about that time. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Had a great show. Enjoyed talking about this stuff. We are going to be back here tomorrow. So many people are used to this only being a Wednesday type of show, but we are going to be live streaming every day at 4 p.m. because there's so much to talk about right now. I think that with the Supreme Court sort of chaos, with the election right around the corner, with all of this, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, all of these criminal justice issues, we're going to make the commitment to just live stream once a day until a lot of this stuff gets settled. So until we have a new Supreme Court nominee, until we have a new president, which may be the same as the old president, or until, this stuff just is no longer even possible to talk about, or whatever happens, we're going to keep talking about it. So do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber, and share this channel with other people if you want to maybe, spread the word around a little bit, because these are great topics, great issues, and I see there is a lot of information, or a lot of conversation happening in the chat, which is very cool. It's very interesting. It's very it's very sort of humbling that people are talking about these issues, because I've been talking about them for a long time, and for a long time they've just been sort of sliding under the radar. So now I'm excited to see that people are interested, and that we may actually start to see some movement on these issues. They're going to talk about it at the debate. We'll see if anything comes of it. So thanks for tuning in. Quick reminder, if you know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, anybody you know, love, or trust, or they trust you, we can help them out. We have an awesome team here. We offer free case evaluations. We help people with criminal charges all the time. We do an excellent job at it. We would love a referral from you. Otherwise, no worries. We'll see you here tomorrow at 4 p.m. We're going to do this live. We'll close it out. Then we'll probably be back on Saturday too, because that is big SCOTUS announcement day. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today.